So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this RCLCN seminar. Here, I will say a few words about the center. The name of the center is so-called Research Center for Language, Cognition, and Neuroscience, with RCLCN as the acronym. And as you will see here, right, our center was established on about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and now in its second stage or second 3 years period. And here is a link for our center's webpage. So please browse the webpage for more detailed information. And currently, our center have 9 faculty members and with 2 distinguished chair professors. Oh, okay, thank you. Professor Li Ping, as well as 1, 2 worldly well-known scholars, and with Professor Shen Li here, and 2 associate professors, and assistant professors with research assistant professors, 9 members. Here is the major theme of our center's work. As you have already seen, there are 3 key terms in the name, right? This means actually just 3 areas are intimately related. To say language has a central role in cognition, which in turn is enabled by our powerful brain. Of course, neuroscience is the scientific study of the brain. We adopt a multidisciplinary perspective in our research for many themes which are correlated with language, allaying the humanities with the life sciences, right? And these themes are here. How native and foreign languages are acquired during childhood as a L1, the first language, or during adulthood, learning language as a second language. How spoken and written languages interact, and how biological environment factors enhance or impair language behaviors, such as autism, aphasia, dementia. These are all due to the neurodegeneration. And we are also interested in how language is related to another fundamental human universal, that music, right? Manifested in phenomena such as musicianship, amnesia, and MIT. To ground our research empirically, we often use various methods of neuroscience and psychology, including, but not limited to, behavioral studies, e.g., functional MRI, functional near-infrared FNS, eye tracking, and several types of brain stimulation. We are eager to collaborate with researchers of centers, laboratories, institutes within PolyU, and those out of PolyU. We welcome collaborations. And today, we are honored to have 2 speakers. Oh, so it's frozen. Okay, the first speaker is Professor Zhenguang. Okay. Professor Cai is an associate professor at the Department of Linguistics and Modern Languages of the Trent University of Hong Kong. He received his PhD in the field of psychology from University of Edinburgh. He uses structural priming to reveal representations and processes underlying language comprehension, language production, and language learning. And more recently, he investigates how people adjust language comprehension and production in light of their interlocutor. He is also interested in trans-character handwriting. And for more information, please visit his lab's webpage. His research has been supported by several high prestigious grants, including the most recent RCLCN titled with Neurocognitive Mechanisms of Character Amnesia in Trans Writing. And his topic today is how do people understand implausible sentences? Our second speaker is Professor Xu Yi. Professor Xu is an assistant professor of our department. She received her PhD in linguistics from Indiana University. Her research interests include linguistic theory, syntactic interfaces of information structure, focused prosody, computational and psycholinguistic language processing, and technology in teaching Chinese as a foreign language. Now, her research has been supported also by various research grants, including the most recent RCLCN one, titled with Enriching the Context of Prosodic Training, a study of Cantonese speakers' perception and production of Mandarin tone sandy and focus prosody. And her topic today is the eyes as a window to the thoughts. So let's welcome Professor Cai to give his lecture.
Yeah, please. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Professor Peng, for the introduction, and thank the Research Center for inviting me to give a talk here. So my talk today is actually based on a paper that I recently published in Cognition, and it's about implausible sentences, and you see what I mean here by implausible sentences later. Right. Thank you. Right. So first, I'd like to play a sentence to you and then ask you a question. So it's a simple sentence here.
The mother gave the candle the daughter.
Okay, let me play again.
The mother gave the candle the daughter.
And then if I ask you this question, did the daughter receive something? Yes or no? Show of hand, yes. Okay, no. Yeah, so some say yes, some say no. And this is normal actually, because the sentence you have just heard is something like the mother gave the candle the daughter, which is implausible, right? You don't give a candle to someone, right? You give someone a candle, right? And so that's my topic today. How do we understand sentences like this, which are implausible? And so now you may say no to the question, like, did the daughter receive something? Say no. And that means you have a literal interpretation of the implausible sentence. You may say yes. And that means you have a non-literal interpretation of the sentence. So that's what I mean. When I say have a literal interpretation, you understand the sentence literally. When I say have a non-literal understanding or interpretation, you understand it non-literally, right? According to semantics, basically. And so, yeah, but why do we non-literally interpret an implausible sentence? Well, there are several reasons. I'm not sure how the best stand, put the stand here, so I can look at the screen too, right? So you might think, well, actually, you might have misunderstood the sentence, okay, because of different reasons. For example, probably you heard the sentence in a very noisy environment. And so originally the sentence was meant to like, the mother gave the candle to the daughter, but because of the noise, you did not hear to. So it ended up with the sentence, the mother gave the candle to the daughter. Or the speaker might have misspoken. We know we all have speech errors, and you sometimes just misproduce the sentence and say, the mother gave the candle to the daughter, when you want to say, the mother gave the candle to the daughter, right? And in fact, you often do interpret implausible sentences non-literally, in a non-literal way. And I'll give you evidence later. Right? So then, how do you interpret this sentence non-literally then? Well, there are two possible accounts. So in the paper, we contrasted two accounts. One is what we call the non-literal synthetic analysis account. And so basically that means that you construct a non-veridical synthetic analysis that leads to a plausible meaning of the sentence. For example, you hear the mother gave the candle daughter, and in order to arrive at a plausible meaning, you kind of have a non-literal synthetic analysis. You think actually there's a two here, right? So you kind of revise the structure a little bit, right? Into, for example, the mother gave the candle to the daughter. You insert a two there. And then from this structure, you interpret the sentence. You have a plausible, non-literal interpretation, right? And such account is consistent with the traditional accounts of sentence comprehension, right? So like in the 90s last century, right? A lot of accounts of sentence processing. And according to this, which meaning you get from a sentence depends on the synthetic analysis you assign to the sentence, right? For example, now, the spy saw the cop with a binocular. What does it mean? Well, there are two meanings, right? The cop could have the binocular if you attach with the binocular to the cop, or the spy could have the binocular if you attach with the binocular to saw. So which meaning you get depends on the synthetic analysis you assign to a sentence. The second account is what I call the non-literal semantic interpretation account. So according to this account, you infer a plausible meaning based on the semantic relations among the words or concepts, right? So in our sentence, the daughter is a more likely recipient than a theme of a given event, right? So in that case, you don't need to come up with a non-veridical synthetic analysis. You simply actually determine a plausible meaning based on the semantic relations of the words, of the concepts. And such account is consistent with the recent dual roots accounts of sentence comprehension. So according to these accounts, when you hear the mother gave the candle to the daughter, what you do, first you do semantic interpretation based on synthetic analysis, as you normally do with sentences, right? So you have a dual analysis for this sentence, and based on this synthetic analysis, you have this give recipient, candle's recipient, and daughter's theme. And there's a second root in such account that you can do semantic interpretation based on plausibility considerations. For example, then, you know, candle is a more likely theme in a given event, and daughter is a more likely recipient in a given event, such that you interpret daughter as a recipient and candle as the theme in a sentence. And so there actually been quite, well, not quite a lot, but some empirical studies addressing how people interpret implausible sentences. And so this is one of the firsts. And so in this study, Ferreira basically asked participants to read a sentence like, the mouse was eaten by the cheese, which is implausible. And then asked participants to identify the agent or the patient, right? For example, is the agent the mouse? It's a yes or no, basically. And then from your answers, we know whether you interpret the sentence literally or non-literally, right? And so what she found was the answers indicated whether the sentence was interpreted literally or non-literally. And what she found was that participants often interpreted implausible passive sentences according to plausibility. For example, treating the mouse as the agent, rather than according to syntax, for example, treating cheese as the agent. Right. But well, there are some subsequent studies showing that probably this result reflects some kind of post-interpretive processes. That is actually, you can have normal semantic interpretation, right? But the answers reflect kind of your explicit thoughts about the meaning, right? And for example, in this study, Beda and Meng in 2008 showed that participants were equally accurate at judging the plausibility of plausible and implausible sentences. That is, if you give them a sentence and ask them, is this plausible or implausible? If you give them a plausible sentence, they say plausible. If you give them an implausible sentence, they are as often to say it's implausible, right? So there's no difference there, actually. And now this study, which was published in this very prestigious journal, so Gibbs and Taylor have participants read sentences like this, like the mother gave the candle the daughter, or the mother gave the daughter to the candle. Now, both are implausible, right? And I like to refer the first sentence as a double object dative sentence, DO. I'm going to use DO, PO. The second one, I'm going to call it the prepositional object dative, or PO. So when I say DO, I mean a structure like this, right? Now, verb, now. And when I say PO, I refer to structure like this. Now, verb, now, prepositional phrase, PP, right? So DO, PO here. And then after reading one of these sentences, participant may answer a question like, did the daughter receive something, right? As I showed you just now. And so if they say no, that means they have a literal interpretation of the sentence. If they say yes, that means they have a non-literal interpretation of the sentence. And what they show is they show more non-literal interpretations of implausible DOs than of implausible POs. So there's an effect of structure there, right? That's interesting. Effect structure here. That means what? People are more likely to non-literally interpret an implausible DO than an implausible PO. Right? So why is that? And so they propose this noisy channel account. So according to this, communication tends to be noisy. We know that, right? If I'm talking here, you can hear the fan, right? You may get distracted. So, and as a result, sentences can be sometimes corrupted. Right? By corrupt, I mean you mishear sentences, or the speaker misspeaks, right? So, and people make inferences about whether a sentence is implausible as a result of misspeaking or mishearing. Right? As I said, if you hear the mother gave the candle to the daughter, you may reason, is it possible that a speaker wanted to say something plausible, but he misspoke? Well, actually, did I mishear? Right? So you have this reason in your head. And that's the noisy channel account. Basically, it says, well, language communication occurs in noisy environment, and sentences can be corrupted. So when you hear an implausible sentence, it is possible that the sentence is implausible because of corruption, right? Because either you mishear it, or the speaker misproduces, has some speech error there. And so a sentence can be implausible because a word is accidentally omitted due to misspeaking or mishearing. So for example, now this is the intended sentence. The mother gave the candle to the daughter. And it could become implausible if you omit this too. It becomes the mother gave the candle to the daughter, right? You omit the preposition to, either in hearing or actually in speaking. And then a sentence can be implausible because a word is accidentally inserted due to, again, misspeaking or mishearing, right? So a sentence, the intended sentence could be this one: the mother gave the daughter the candle, but because you insert a to here by accident, it became the mother gave the daughter to the candle, which is implausible. And now there's evidence for this account. So this is this kind of Bayesian size principle. I'm not going to elaborate a lot here. It basically says omission of a word is more likely to occur than the insertion of a word. Okay, so let me give an example here, right? So that means what? The likelihood of to being accidentally omitted in this sentence here is what? The probability will be 1 out of 8. Why? Well, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There were 8 words. And the probability of one of the words being omitted is 1 out of 8, right? But the likelihood of to being accidentally inserted due to mishearing, misspeaking would be what? 1 out of 6,000, depending on the size of vocabulary, right? If you have 6,000 words in your vocabulary, the probability that you simply accidentally select to and insert it into speech is 1 out of 6,000, right? So that means what? The probability of omission is larger, is higher than the probability of insertion. And that's the Bayesian size principle, right? This is a well-tested principle in cognitive psychology, in child language learning, for example. Yep, so that's why people are more likely to non-literally interpret an implausible DL than implausible PO, because it is more likely that an implausible PO is as a result of corruption than an implausible PO is, right? So if you have that thought, then you say, yeah, I am going to, now when I hear implausible DL, it is more likely that it is corrupted. Okay, the intended sentence is actually a plausible one, right? Okay, so the noise channel count thus is consistent with the non-literal synthetic analysis count, right? So you come up with a non-literal synthetic analysis first before you understand its meaning, right? So participants revise the syntax of the implausible sentence to arrive at a non-literal but plausible interpretation, right? Well, but this is really an inference rather than direct evidence in Gibson et al. 2013, right? So this is really kind of inferred, right? They did not provide direct evidence that people revised the syntax of the implausible sentence. And that's what we did actually. So we published a paper recently where we provide the evidence that people do revise the structure of the implausible sentence. And the paradigm that we used is structure priming. It refers to the tendency for people to repeat a synthetic structure that they have previously encountered. So basically, if you have encountered PO, you're more likely to use a PO later. If you previously encounter a PO, you're more likely to use a PO. Okay, I'm going to give you a more concrete example later. And structure priming occurs across languages in basically all languages we know. In different methods, in different constructions. So it's a very robust effect. It mainly reflects activation and learning of synthetic representations. It is often used to map out synthetic representations that people construct during sentence comprehension production. So for example, I myself have 2 papers here actually, where I use structure priming to determine the synthetic representations of, for example, verb phrase ellipses and sentences with a missing argument, for example. And this paper also look at how people synthetically parse ambiguous sentences. Yeah, I'm not going to go into details of these papers. If you're interested, take a look at them. So let me come to experiment 1 and with some rationale for the experiment. So if I ask you to describe a picture in English, a picture like this, right? And so it's easy. You may say, well, the cop passed the artist a book, right? So that's a cop, that's cop, artist, and book, right? And so then this is a double object dative or DO. I'm going to call this a DO. Or you can say, this way, you say the cop passed a book to the artists. In this case, it's a prepositional object dative or PO, right? I'm going to say this is a PO, that's a PO, right? So in English, there are 2 ways at least to describe a picture like this. And what they found is now what structure you use, it seems depends on your previous synthetic experience. Say, if you had previously heard something like the mother gave the daughter the candle, which is a DO, and then that sentence will activate your DO synthetic representation in your mind, right? And then that activated DO representation then would lead you to more likely use of DO structure in describing this picture, right? And let's say now, in this case, you 70% of the time use a DO and 30% of the time use a PO, right? But if you had previously heard something like the mother gave the candle to the daughter, which is a PO, right? And then you activate a PO representation, which then lead you to use a PO structure in the description. And let's say now, in this case, if I can describe the picture as a DO 30% of time and a PO 70% of time. So hypothetically, for illustration only, right? And if that's the case, you can calculate the priming effect, right? The priming effect would be then 70% minus 30% is 40%, right? You get DO is 70%, DO minus 30%, DO here. That's 40%. The same, you get 70% PO minus 30% PO here. Still 40% the same, right? Now the question that we ask is, what if the prime is an implausible sentence, right? Something like this. The mother gave the candle to the daughter, which is implausible. this is an implausible DO sentence. Okay, so now if the non-literal synthetic analysis account is correct, now according to this account, what do? Well, you first, of course, you activate the DO structure, right? Because this is DO. But you also, now according to this account, you revise the structure of the sentence, right? So then that means what? You revise it into a PO, right? And that means you also activate the PO structure. Now, because both structures are activated, you are going to sometimes use this structure and sometimes also use this structure, right? And that means let's say hypothetically, you are using a DO structure 60% of the time and a PO structure 40% of the time, right? Now, then what about when you hear this sentence? The mother gave the daughter to the candle, which is an implausible PO, right? Again, you activate the PO structure, but you also revise the structure for a plausible interpretation, right? And that means you also activate the DO structure, right? Which lead to the use of DO structure later describing this picture, right? And that's in this case again, use of DO structure 40% of time and PO structure 60% of time. Now, if you calculate the priming effect following implausible primes, that would be 20%, right? What that means is if you have previously heard an implausible sentence, the priming effect will be reduced compared to if you have previously heard a plausible sentence, right? So this account will predict reduced structure priming following implausible sentences compared to following plausible sentences. But what if this account is correct? Remember, I contrast two accounts. One is the non-literal synthetic analysis account. The other is this account, the non-literal semantic interpretation account. Now, according to this account, you don't come up with a revised structure. You do not revise the structure of the sentence. Instead, you come up with a meaning, a plausible meaning based on semantic relations, based on plausibility considerations, right? So let's say you hear this prime sentence, and of course that would activate the DO, yeah, but you don't revise the structure, so you don't activate the PO structure, right? And then you still have kind of 70% DO and 30% PO in descriptions, right? And if you hear this sentence, and then you activate only the PO structure, but no DO structure, and again, you have 30% DO and 70% PO, and you calculate the priming effect, it's the same, right? The two will be the same. So this account then predicts that there should be similar structure priming following implausible primes compared to following plausible primes. Now, the two accounts have different predictions regarding whether you would have reduction following implausible primes, and then use structure priming to tease apart the two accounts. And that's what we did, right? So we have a kind of had a 2x2 design. So the prime sentence is either plausible or implausible. So these are plausible ones, and these are implausible ones, right? And it either had a DO structure or PO structure. This DO, DO, PO, PO. So 2x2 design, and they would comprehend a sentence, they would listen to a sentence, and then they would answer a question. And from here, we know whether they had a literal or non-literal interpretation of the sentence, right? And finally, we ask them to describe picture. And from the picture descriptions, we can measure the structural priming effect, right? And we wanted to know whether there's reduced structural priming following implausible primes compared to following plausible primes, right? So the experiment was online using Qualtrics, and got about 96 native speakers of English recruited from Prolific. They were excluded for not describing pictures as instructed. They had a lot of misdescriptions anyway. And we had 20 experiment items with 60 feelers, and these materials were from previous study, Gibson et al. 2017. So as I said, they would hear a prime sentence, then they would answer a question by choosing yes or no, and then they would type in a sentence to describe a picture. We provide the verb here, right? So the prime is either DO, PO, either plausible, implausible. And so from here, we know whether they have literal or non-literal interpretation, right? And from here, we know whether they use a DO or PO description, right? And now that the verb differ between the prime and the target, hence here, gap here, right? Now, so let's look at how people interpreted the prime sentence. Okay, so what I found is that that's here. So how did they answer to the conventional question, yes or no here? What I found is found more non-literal interpretations for implausible sentences than for plausible sentences, right? And this is a proportion of non-literal interpretations more here than here, right? And that, of course, is normal, right? So if you hear a plausible sentence, you don't have to come up with a non-literal interpretation, right? And more interestingly, we also have observed more non-literal interpretations for DO sentences than for PO sentences, right? And this replicated what was found previously by Gibson Taylor in 2 studies, right? So at least our interpretation results replicated previous findings. That's good. That shows that our experiment at least was valid. And let's look at picture descriptions, this part, right? That's where we measure structural priming, right? And now in this talk, I'm going to talk about a lot about proportion of DO responses. But it's the same really. In analysis, we actually use mixed effects model, right? We compare DO with PO. But for illustration, we are going to use proportion of DO responses, okay? And that would be complementary to proportion of PO responses, right? And I'm going to talk about, right, so they would sometimes describe it as a DO, sometimes describe it as a PO. They may describe it like, no, the cake was given by the parrot to the box. In that case, we just exclude that response, okay? And now we're going to talk about whether a prime sentence was literally interpreted. For example, if the answer no to this question here, or non-literally interpreted if the answer yes to this question, okay? We will treat this as another factor. Okay, so now we first compare priming from plausible sentences and priming for implausible sentences. So here's the structural priming effect when the prime sentence was plausible, right? And we got about more DO responses following a DO prime than following a PO prime. 28% was 20% roughly. So the red bar is DO prime and the blue bar is PO prime, right? So it's more DO responses following DO prime than following PO prime, right? And that's standard structure priming, which is good again. It shows actually our experiment replicate previous structural priming findings. Now let's look at how about the structural priming following implausible sentences. Remember the 2 accounts have different predictions regarding the priming effect here, right? That's what we found. We found less structural priming following implausible primes than plausible primes, right? So if you look at here, like the difference between the red bar and the blue bar can reflect the priming effect, right? So here the priming effect is huge, right? Not much here because there are not many plausible primes being non-literally interpreted, but still some priming effect here. But if you look at here, the priming effect is really small, right? And here actually reversed, right? So we found less structural priming when people had heard an implausible sentence than when they had heard a plausible sentence. The finding then support the non-literal synthetic account, synthetic analysis account, right? So basically, that means what? When participants heard an implausible DO, they had both a DO analysis and also a PO analysis. When they had heard an implausible PO, they had both a PO analysis and a DO analysis. In other words, they revised the structure of an implausible sentence. And more, so we also only look at implausible sentence primes, but compare when they are literally interpreted versus when they were non-literally interpreted. And what we found, and what we want to ask, whether people activate the non-literal analysis to a great extent when they interpret an implausible sentence non-literally, when they do it literally, okay? And we found, yeah, that's the case. So that's when they literally interpreted a implausible sentence. You get some priming effect here, but when they non-literally interpreted a implausible sentence, the priming effect is actually reversed. we actually got reversed structure priming, right? And that means like there's less structure priming when implausible primes were interpreted non-literally than literally, right? It's more, the effect's more, but it's still significant. And finally, we also compare these two, right? So we compare sentences that were literally understood, right? Plausible primes that were literally understood, implausible primes that were literally understood. We still found less structure priming following literally interpreted implausible primes than following literally interpreted plausible primes. So the structure priming here is less compared to structure priming here. And again, this suggests that people still activate the non-literal analysis of an implausible sentence even when they interpret that sentence literally, right? If actually they have a literal interpretation of an implausible sentence, they still revise the structure of that sentence. Right, just to summarize, so we found that participants were more likely to non-literally interpret implausible than plausible sentences, and to non-literally interpret DO sentences than PO sentences, replicating previous studies. And more importantly, structure priming was reduced following implausible primes compared to following plausible primes, following non-literally interpreted implausible primes, then following literally interpreted implausible primes, and following literally interpreted implausible primes compared to following literally interpreted plausible primes, right? So all these findings are consistent with the non-literal synthetic analysis account, but not with a non-literal semantic interpretation account, right? That is, participants construct a non-literal synthetic analysis for implausible sentence, right? So for implausible DO sentence, they construct both a DO analysis and also a PO analysis. Right? I say, then we did experiment 2, and the reason is that in experiment 1, we had explicit interpretation, right? That's question answering occurring before picture description. And that question answering might affect your picture description, right? And so therefore, in experiment 2, we swap the order, right? We swap the order of these two. So in experiment 2, we had they listening to a sentence, they describe picture first, and then they answer a question about the sentence. So we swap the order of the question answering and picture description. Everything else was the same as in experiment 1. And now we got the same pattern in terms of interpretation. So more non-literal interpretations for implausible sentences than for plausible sentences, and more non-literal interpretations for DO sentences than for PO sentences. The same as in experiment 1. In terms of priming, picture description, when you compare plausible primes versus implausible primes, what we found is that is the priming effect you get when a prime was implausible. And these are the priming effects you get when a prime was plausible. And still, we got marginally less priming following plausible than implausible than implausible primes. Now, the p-value is kind of a bit larger than 0.05. So this is a weak replication of what we found in experiment 1. However, if you compare these two, this one, like the implausible primes literally interpreted versus non-literally interpreted, we actually found similar priming between the two. And so this is not replicating what we observed in experiment 1. Again, we compare literally interpreted plausible and implausible primes, these two. Again, we found similar priming between the two. And again, this did not replicate what we found in experiment 1, right? But we did a between experiment comparison to see whether actually the order of tasks matter. And we found no important differences really between two experiments, although some findings in experiment 1 were not observed in experiment 2. But if we did a comparison, there's no major differences between the two experiments, okay? So it appears that question picture order is not critically important. And as small effects may occur, we know that because prime and target use different verbs. Remember, in both experiments, the target verb and the prime verb, they differ from each other. So in experiment 3, we decided to use the same verbs between prime and target. That will give us a stronger structure priming effect. And more importantly, we pre-register the experiment. I'm not sure how many of you know about pre-registration. It's now quite popular, right? Because nowadays you can do a lot of tweaking of a data or research question to get the effect you want. So now if you pre-register experiment, you cannot do that. You have to do exactly what you said you would do. And that's what we did. We pre-registered experiment. We actually wrote all the design, procedure, analysis before we collected the data. And then we analyzed the data as we planned. And so this is 2 by 2 as before, but we also had a third factor, the order. So sometimes the question was answered first, sometimes the picture was described first. Okay. And we got 96 participants, we got 40 items with 60 feelers. And so this is one of the order, right? In this order, they hear the prime, answer question, describe picture. Sometimes they hear prime, describe picture, and then answer question. In terms of interpretation, again, we got the same pattern as in experiment 1. So more non-literal interpretations for implausible sentences than plausible ones, and for DO sentences than for PO sentences. And there's no significant effect of order, task order, or interaction involving order. That's good. And again, that means what? Task order is not critically important. So next, let's compare plausible primes versus implausible primes. So when the prime was implausible, these are the priming effects we got. Okay, so some priming effect, but reversed priming effect here, some priming effect and very small priming effect here. Right? When the prime was implausible, what if the prime was plausible? We get huge priming effects. But here is still reversed. But as I said, this is based on very, very few cases because you really non-literally understood a plausible sentence anyway, right? So what I showed is there's less structure priming following implausible primes than following plausible primes. And then that replicated what we found in experiment 1 and also experiment 2. Again, this effect was not further modulated by task order. What about if you look at implausible primes only, right? So when the implausible prime was non-literally interpreted, you got, well, reversed priming here, a little bit priming effect here. And when it was literally interpreted, you got larger priming effect, right? And again, there's less structure priming when implausible primes were non-literally interpreted than they were literally interpreted. Again, replicating what we found in experiment 1. Well, not in 2 though, right? Again, no effect of task order. Finally, we compare literally interpreted plausible primes and literally interpreted implausible primes. So that's the implausible prime literally interpreted. You got some priming effect there, and this is the priming effect when the sentence was plausible sentences being literally interpreted. You get larger priming effect here. Again, so there's less structure priming following literally interpreted implausible primes than literally interpreted plausible primes. Again, replicating what we found in experiment 1. Again, no effect of task order. Okay, to summarize the key findings across the 3 experiments, in comparing implausible sentence, people construct a non-literal synthetic analysis that affords a plausible interpretation, right? For example, when they hear the mother gave the candle daughter, they revise the structure into a PO structure, right? Such that you first construct a DO analysis, but you also have a PO analysis, right? So when you hear the mother gave the daughter to the candle, which is PO, your PO analysis, but you also have a revised DO analysis, right? And so we can use this to explain the findings. So where there's less priming following dissonance, an implausible one, than following a plausible one, well, because in the implausible one, you have both analysis, but in the plausible one, you only have the DO analysis, right? And that's why structure priming is compromised here compared to here. You got less structure priming following dissonance, an implausible prime literally interpreted, than a plausible prime literally interpreted, because where again, you got both DO and PO here, but you got only DO here. So again, structure priming is compromised here. You got less structure priming following a implausible point non-literally interpreted than an implausible point literally interpreted. And that's because, well, when you actually non-literally interpret implausible sentence, you have the alternative analysis extended to activated to a great extent, right? Compared to when you actually literally interpret it. And that's why you get less structural priming here than here. Right? And so then why would people then construct a non-literal analysis, you may ask? Right? Why do we do that? Why do you go all the trouble constructing a non-literal synthetic analysis? And we propose accounts where actually the non-literal synthetic analysis comes for free, actually. You don't have to do much work to construct the analysis. It comes just for free, okay? And so this is a plausibility-driven prediction account. We know that people predict what they're going to hear when it's predictable, right? Language comprehension is hugely predictive, right? If I say, the boy went to the park to fly before I said the next word, most of you have the word kite already, right? You predict, you anticipate what I'm going to say, right? And we know that abandoned analysis persists in garden path sentences. No, I'm not sure how familiar we are with garden path sentences, right? So you may come up with a wrong analysis, and later you abandon that analysis, but still the analysis lingers on. It's still in your head for some reason, okay? And based on these two assumptions, we propose this account, and let's see what the account says. Okay, so basically, according to our account, when you hear the mother gave, right, you activate both PO and DO, right? This gave can be followed by DO or PO, right? When you then come to the mother gave the candle, now because candle is more plausible a theme than a recipient, you then select or strongly favor the PO analysis, right? And then that means what? You predict upcoming PP. For example, the PP containing recipient, right? The mother gave the candle, you predict to someone, right? Even before you hear to someone, you actually predict that already in your head. And then you hear the mother gave the candle the daughter, which is not compatible with the prediction, right? And it's implausible. And that means they have to construct or actually reactivate the DO analysis, right? But no, according to DO analysis, the interpretation is not plausible, it's implausible, right? What do? Then, because you also maintain the predicted PO, right? For example, by assuming 2 was omitted due to noise with a plausible interpretation, right? So that means you actually have a literal DO analysis, but the predicted PO analysis is also available to you. And then what you have to do then, you have to choose one of them. Which analysis are you going to adopt? And which interpretation are you going to have? Okay. So, but for instance, like the mother gave the candle to the daughter, which is a plausible one, comprehenders only predict PO candle, and which is confirmed by subsequent input. So there's no activation of the non-literal DO analysis. And that's why you have reduced structural priming if the sentence is implausible, then if the sentence is plausible. Now let me go through it again, but for another sentence. The mother gave, you predict PO and DO, right? And the mother gave the daughter. Now because daughter is more likely a recipient, so you select or strongly favor DO. That means you predict upcoming MP to be the theme, right? If you hear the mother gave the daughter, you predict an MP, right? Which would be the theme, right? But when you hear gave the daughter to the candle, right? You then construct or reactivate the PO analysis. And of course, the interpretation is not plausible. But remember, you have predicted a DO analysis already. You can reuse that analysis for a plausible interpretation, right? And then you basically choose whichever analysis which is more strongly activated and is typically associated interpretation, right? And again, if the sentence is the mother gave the daughter the candle, a plausible one, then comprehenders only predict DO at daughter, which is confirmed by subsequent input. And that means what? You do not activate the PO analysis for this sentence, right? And that's why When the sentence is implausible, you have reduced structure priming compared to when the sentence is plausible. Okay, so for implausible sentence, both the literal and non-literal analysis are activated, and hence less structure priming following implausible than plausible primes. And more activated non-literal analysis leads to more likelihood of a non-literal interpretation in question answering, right? Hence, less structure priming following non-literally interpreted implausible primes than literally interpreted implausible primes. And that means what? Non-literal analysis are computed or predicted even when people eventually choose to literally interpret an implausible sentence. Hence, less structure priming following literally interpreted implausible primes than literally interpreted plausible primes. Right? And to conclude, we found that structure priming is reduced for implausible primes versus plausible primes. It is further reduced when an implausible prime is interpreted non-literally than literally. People compute a non-literal analysis that supports a non-literal but plausible interpretation. And we argue that the non-literal analysis comes for free because it's achieved via prediction. Right? I'm not sure how much time I have. Probably that's it. I study, but it's kind of the evidence is quite weak, so I'm not going to report it. Well, like I said, I know quite a lot of you actually do interpreting. And you may say, well, actually, I could use this to do interpreting. Yes, actually, we are using this paradigm now to see how, for example, interpreters translate or interpret implausible sentences. Right? I hope I can share the findings with you at a later point. So thank you very much. And I'm going to skip this or this. And I'd like to thank my collaborators and also my lab here.
Okay, now we still have a couple minutes for Q&A. So any questions from our audience? So any questions from our online audience? Okay, so maybe I will start to ask the first question. So based on the plausibility, listeners can get the right meaning from either the plausible sentence or implausible sentence. But I'm wondering whether the effort is kind of different. So maybe listener may have to pay more effortful to comprehend the implausible sentence, right?
Yeah.
So how can you say something about that?
Yep. So I think so. I think that's a great question. I think there's surely more effort in comprehending an implausible sentence. Can you hear me? Yeah. So imagine like when you comprehend a plausible one, you don't have to choose between two analyses. Remember, but when you comprehend an implausible sentence, there are several steps you have to take. First, you activate a analysis that is incorrect eventually, right? You have to abandon that predicted analysis, and then you have to construct a new analysis, the literal analysis, and eventually you have to choose between the two analyses, right? So there's surely more efforts going on in comprehending an implausible sentence. I think there are some papers currently looking into that issue. I just reviewed a paper where they see whether, for example, working memory matters in the comprehension of implausible sentences. I'm not going to give away the finding because they're under review. But there's also a lot of research, for example, using ERP. I'm not sure whether you know this semantic P600, right? So, for example, if you say like the table was devoured by the child, for example, which is implausible. And what they show is actually when you hear the sentence, you do not have M400 as normally you would have. You actually have P600, right? And P600 in ERP reflects speech repair, language repair. That means actually when you hear something like the table was devoured by the child, you try to revise the sentence in order to make sense of it, right? And that also suggests that it seems you need to put more effort in understanding a implausible sentence.
Okay, thank you. So let's see. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Tsai. I have a small question. I wonder, is it possible if your plausibility-driven prediction account can be applied to other structure-sensitive phenomena in comprehending these implausible sentences? For example, Levy 2016 found they investigated the comprehension in two structures with positional exchanges. One is sentence with prepositional phrases. For example, the package fell from the table to the floor, and they exchange the two nouns, table and floor. And another structure is the active or passive structure. So they swap the two nouns in the main clause. So I wonder whether your account can also account for these phenomena.
Yep, so it's the Levy study you mentioned about, is the Levy, right, the study?
Yes.
Or Levi, I don't know how to pronounce that. Yes, so so I'm not entirely sure about how our account can address that issue. Whether, for example, if you say that, so normally you say that the book, I'm not sure that's correct. The book fell from the table to the floor, right? And if instead you hear the book fell from the floor to the table, that would be implausible. And then can you then use our account to address, to explain that phenomenon? So first, if you say fell from, when you say from the floor, then of course this implausible there, right? But you don't really predict anything, right? There's not much prediction going on here. So yeah, I'm not sure. But relatedly, actually, but you can talk about passive sentences as you asked, right? So you say the mouse was eaten by the cheese, right? So whether our account predict anything, what our account predict is actually you should not have a non-literal analysis, because think like the mouse was eaten. At any point before you hear cheese, you do not predict active sentence, right? Because the mouse could be eaten by the cat, right? It's all plausible all the way. So there's no need, there's no place where you predict an active sentence there. And so our account actually predict, our account said, I think we said something like that in our cognition paper. We predict that when you comprehend a implausible transitive sentence, like active or passive, you do not revise the structure because you will not have predict the alternative structure. And actually there's some data recently. So data by a student in Edinburgh. What we found is, unlike datives, when you hear transitives which are implausible, you don't revise the structure of the transitives, right? And now, of course, there's a paper by Christensen et al. 2020, where they found that actually you do revise the structure of implausible transitives, but we could not replicate the finding. We did not, we've done 3 or 4 experiments already with some pre-registered experiment actually, and we could not replicate their finding. So yeah, it's an interesting question where actually, does our account apply to all implausible sentences? We don't know. I don't think you can when you don't have prediction in a structure, like in an implausible passive. You basically do not predict an active structure. And then our account predict that you should not have a revised structure for that implausible sentence.
Okay. Okay, the last question.
Thank you for your lecture. I have a question about the order of the 2 tasks. So the question, answer the question and describe the picture. So to my understanding, if you if the answer question is in the first, of course, the interval between the priming prime and target is larger. And the second point is that if the answer question is in the first, then the subjects need to understand the priming sentence much deeper if they compare to if they put the question in later. So, but your results found there is no differences between the orders. I want to no, how about you think about these 2 points?
Yeah, very, very good observation, right? So yeah, there's an interval difference between two tasks, right? So when you answer a question first and describe picture, there's a longer distance between prime and target compared to when you describe picture first and answer a question, right? And then you should expect larger priming when the prime and target are together than when they are separated. And we did not observe that difference in structure priming. And you said, why? A very good question, actually. So we reason actually the question answering reinforce the primes in some way so that it offset, it counteracts the distance effect. I think that's probably why. So for example, when you hear a sentence and then answer a question, you have to somehow replay the sentence in your head sometimes. And that replaying would kind of enhance structure priming, offsetting the effects of distance. I wonder whether that answers the question. Thank you.
So, okay, due to the time limit, we have to pause here. Let's thank Professor Tai again for his wonderful sharing.
Thank you very much.